I would like to welcome everyone into the session. My name is Shannon Pestun. I'm a senior advisor with the Diversity Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and talking about the advancement of and pursuit of entrepreneurship and incubators and accelerators in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. This is our 5th session in our Inclusive Entrepreneurship webinar series. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the beautiful lands on which we are calling in from today. And I wish to respectfully acknowledge the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples whose presence continues to enrich our communities. As this is a virtual event, I recognize that the land acknowledgement where I'm calling in from might not be the territory that you are calling in from. And so I ask that in this case, you just pause and take a moment to think about the land that you are on and take responsibility to acknowledge the current treaty holders of this land. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and to protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Today's webinar is going to examine the critical role of incubators and accelerators in nurturing entrepreneurship. We're going to look at how these entities support startups from ideation and scaling and their impact on the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're going to provide an overview of the incubator and accelerator landscape, discuss some of the support systems and incubators and accelerators and how these are giving support to entrepreneurs. We're also going to look at the challenges faced by a lot of the organizations and their resident startups, and to highlight some of the success stories, what's working, what lessons have we learned from incubators and accelerators so that we can continue to move forward in a good way. By the end of this webinar, we hope that you have a better understanding of how incubators and accelerators operate, and more importantly, their significance in supporting new ventures and the opportunities and resources available to entrepreneurs through these various platforms. I'm absolutely pleased to welcome today's panelists. We have some incredible speakers. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in one moment. But at a high level, I'm so excited to welcome Charlie Wall-Andrews, who's the Assistant Professor of Creative Industries at Toronto Metropolitan University. We also have Tomke Augustin, who is a Postdoctoral Fellow at the Asper School of Business at the University of Manitoba. Wen Teoh, the Director, EPICentre, University of Windsor. Dr. Lesley Esford, Executive Director at SFU VentureLabs. I started in introducing you, Charlie, so I'm going to pass it on over and allow you to say, just if you were to describe the work that you're doing, your passion for this space into one soundbite, what would that be?
Wow, creating more inclusion in the creative industries through entrepreneurship. And a lot of that ties to incubators and accelerators and how that fits into the ecosystem and the creative industries. And so I have the opportunity to research this. Not only have I done this through the dissertation, but also as a faculty member at TMU as well. And throughout the discussion, I'm sure we'll have a chance to go a little more deeper into some case studies.
Thank you so much and welcome to the conversation. Dr. Tomke Augustin, welcome to the panelists. Please, like your soundbite, why are you so passionate about the work that you're doing? And tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you. My work is specifically on business incubators and accelerators in Canada and the role in creating an inclusive ecosystem. So this webinar is an exciting opportunity for me to discuss the role and the challenges and best practices that I found in the research.
Well, thank you so much for that. And Wen, welcome to the conversation. Please come on in and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk to everyone. So our mission is to train future entrepreneurial thinkers because we believe that entrepreneurs are problem solvers, they are change makers, and our society needs them, regardless of whether they are starting a new business or they are working for someone else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dr. Lesley Esford, welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. I have to say that I've spent my entire adult life either in supporting or advising startup companies. So it's definitely a passion for me, but specifically around science-based ventures. And I think that the reason about science-based ventures is obviously I'm passionate about science, but it has to do with that I think that those companies have a huge impact on society. And so if we're looking at climate tech or health tech or things that are actually global challenges that will have global impact.
Well, thank you so much and welcome. And I just received a comment in the chat that my background can be distracting for some. And I appreciate the comment. I'm going to just say why I appreciate it, because it was spoken in the spirit of for those of us who have different life experiences. And for some, this might be distracting. So I appreciate the comment, and I am going to change my virtual background. I'm just going to blur it. So I hope that I appreciate the comment very much in the spirit with which it was written. So thank you as we continue to think about building a more inclusive, accessible world that fits for everyone. Thank you for that. I hope that this is better. Okay, on to our conversation today and our view of incubators and accelerators that play such an important role in the startups, introducing those social networks, bringing us into access to financial capital, testing out those products' ideas and the validation and around that ideation stage. My first question, Tomke, is coming to you. But what is the role of incubators and accelerators in the startup ecosystem and in the advancement of inclusive entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm happy to take a first stab at that. So business incubators and accelerators are kind of like the intermediaries in the ecosystem. They connect entrepreneurs with the stakeholders in the ecosystem, such as mentors, like the networks, investors, etc. So they are often the first point or an early point of contact for the entrepreneurs. That's why it's so important for them to have this, responsible and inclusive way to introduce them to the ecosystem. And they also are, like many of them are partially funded by the government and have other like sponsorships and fundings, so that they, on one hand, act upon these priorities of these funders, but also have some power in shaping these priorities by reporting back and discussing ways to improve or change any services. So in that way, incubators and accelerators actually are a pretty powerful actor to support the ecosystem to become more inclusive and to support entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds.
Thank you. And I saw some head nods there. So Dr. Lesley, or I'm just going to call you Lesley. I'll call you just short. Okay. Lesley, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the role is so critical, because it is when you're looking at the journey an entrepreneur goes through, there's so many things that they need to learn. And so I always look at the support that the entrepreneurs or the ecosystem is giving to that entrepreneur is to help them move their technology or their opportunity forward, but helping them with the other aspects of their journey. So the business aspect, so they're not having to learn everything, because that's I think the challenge of an entrepreneur, is that the expectation is that all of the ins and outs of starting a company and growing that company. And that's where I think the role of that nurturing role, and Shannon, you said that at the very beginning, it is a nurturing role. It's making sure that you're supporting what that company needs at that particular time.
And so like in these environments, so what are entrepreneurs expecting? They're going to have some peer-to-peer lending in there. There's going to be mentors in there as well. So we're talking about nurturing. Is it sort of that what does that look like?
So it's kind of a little bit of the question I was going to answer, but I'll say a little bit here now, is that it is a combination of both. And I think that part of the challenge with right now is that some places have space and some don't. And so if you don't, you have to create that sense of community, I think, virtually, which is I think a little bit harder. But I think having that peer-to-peer is really important, but also having people that have done it before, and having the people, and there's two reasons why they're important. One is it shows that it is possible. So when I happened to go through my PhD, I had two people that in my department that were faculty that went on to start a company. As a result of that, so many people out of my class started a company because they thought it was possible. So those mentors say, you can do it, and are role models, but I think they also bring incredible life experience and expertise. And that's really what you want in that mentor. But it also is we've actually had to exit mentors from the program because they just didn't have the ability to share that knowledge in a helpful way.
Interesting. I don't want to take you away from what you were going to say in a further question, but thanks for letting me go a little bit off track there. Charlie, I'm going to come over to you. So just the question again is, what is the role of incubators and accelerators in the startup ecosystem and in the advancement of inclusive entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, entrepreneurs, accelerators have typically focused on tech startups, right? And I'm coming from creative industries, and it's very fascinating to see how the notion of incubators and accelerators can help cultivate and have an impact on creative entrepreneurs. So in a completely different field, a completely different realm. And so when we look at, in the case of the incubator for creative entrepreneurship, we're taking artists that musically, they're phenomenal. Like, they have so much talent, but they don't know the business. They don't know how to make money. They don't know how to build a brand. They just don't know how to navigate the industry to commercialize a talent that they have. And so through the incubator, they're able to go through it and actually develop those skills, building on what Lesley is talking about, building a peer network of other artists that are on that journey, and also getting mentorship from more established professionals in the creative industries and more seasoned artist entrepreneurs that have experienced that journey and can relate and help provide some support along that journey. So with this particular case, what we saw was when artists get access to entrepreneurship training, developing that mindset. It's not, I'm just an artist, but realizing, no, you're actually a small business. And so the way that you move in the industry has to reflect that for many reasons. And by doing this, it's actually empowering artists to have more success in building a sustainable career. Particularly in an industry, because when you're not in the creative industries per se, when you look at it from the outside looking in, it looks really cool. Like, everybody was like, yeah, I'd love to work in the music industry or the arts or film. But when you're in it, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of barriers. And so if you're not able to navigate the ecosystem, it's going to be challenging to build that career. And so the incubator really helped in this case. And we see similar examples with accelerators as well. Women in Music Canada has an accelerator for female women identifying artists and business owners to be able to get this different kinds of support to just continue to thrive and grow. So in terms of creating more inclusion in the ecosystem, these opportunities help because it creates community, provides the support, and we're really happy with the impact that we've seen so far and continuing to get feedback to shape it accordingly. So the incubators and accelerators play a pretty important role, not just in tech to create more inclusion in the ecosystem, but also in other fields as well, other industries.
I love that you tackle this idea that we just assume that, most of the incubators and the accelerators are tech focused, because really that's where their roots are. That's where it started. but recognizing the importance of looking at different sectors and looking at different types of entrepreneurs, different types of businesses. And so I can't wait to hear more about the work that you're doing. Over at the University of Windsor, we have what's your thoughts on the role of incubators and accelerators and how they're advancing inclusive entrepreneurship?
So in addition to everything that the speakers have spoken, we have two we have two programs that specifically for non-technical, non-STEM. So we have a social entrepreneurship program. So the program is specifically to support students or community members that would like to use business strategy to address certain challenges that they see in the community. We've run this for, I think, 5 cohorts we have completed, and some of them end up starting a business, so for profit social enterprise. Some actually go on and start a non-for-profit organization, trying to do something great and creatively positive impact in our community. So that's an example of how accelerator program can support some immediate needs that stemmed from our community. The other program that we have is called a Venture Women program. So the program supports women entrepreneurs in starting up a business. And in our we have completed 5 cohorts. We are in the middle of the 6th. And the patterns that we've seen from our entrepreneurs are they want to start a small, medium-sized businesses. So, and I think Diversity Institute has some numbers that, a lot of women tend to start service-based businesses. When we first launched the program, we were focusing on emerging tech related industry for women. And we had a few, and that was in the middle of pandemic that we started. And then we saw this huge demand from community members and students want to start their own businesses, and they are women. And we shifted our focus and we pivoted to, have a program that respond to the community needs and to support women who want to start their own business. And that program has been very successful. So I believe we have 60% of them that are still running their business. So to us, that is a big success.
Thank you all for that. I want to just flip and talk about, the different type of role and how incubators and accelerators differ in their approach to, say, some other mainstream education programs or other mentorship programs in supporting specifically startups. Lesley, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Okay, so I think there's some commonality, definitely, and it was wonderful to hear Charlie speak, because what she's saying for the creative industry, I think can actually lean right into the science-based ventures. So it's looking at what else they need in addition to moving their science or technology forward. So I think there is some commonality in whether they have space or not have space, and there's definitely best practices around how you create that space. And then the other part is around that sense of community. I think all incubators and accelerators are about building network and having mentors. But I think they differ because of a few things, is that where the entrepreneur is in their journey. So at the very ideation stage, let's say, you're really trying to build that entrepreneurial mindset. And so programming is around saying, this is what it is like to be an entrepreneur. This is, these are the challenges that you're facing. Because one of the things is you expect that a lot of those companies are not going to make it. But what you're hoping is that you've actually built an entrepreneur and that they'll go on to do something different, and really accepting that failure is an acceptable thing at that ideation phase, or moving on quickly. And then you get into the company creation phase, where again, there's some best practices around, the type of support, but there's also some differences if you are working, whether it be within a geographic region. So I think we experience this where we see differences if you are within the city of Vancouver or the city of Toronto, where you probably can work with one particular group. So for us, we work with science-based ventures, but in the regions, you actually have a much broader mandate of the companies that you actually work with. And so you need to be more of a generalist. I think that's where you can have some differences if you are supporting a specific sector. For example, for us, we recognize that science-based ventures are really good at moving their science forward, and they probably have moved their technology much further than before they've actually ever talked to a customer. And so for us, encouraging them to look at the market and evaluate the market opportunity is there. So I think that sector differences happen. And the purpose of it there is around company creation and setting up the company properly and making sure that it can attract the investment that it needs. I think as the company goes along the journey, then you see much more very specialized levels of support. So once they're in the growth phase, that becomes a very big part of it. I think that there are groups that focus on helping companies raise money, but then there are others that actually focus on making the company attractive to investment. And my preference is the other, because every entrepreneur needs money. It's a general thing, but what you need is you want to make them investable. So I think that you can see those differences in whether people work with cohorts or not cohorts. Is very, very different. But I think, as Wen had talked about, responding to your ecosystem and making sure that, as I said, there's generalities to supporting entrepreneurs at the various stages. But I think you then have to put it into your local context. And if you don't do that, then you're going to miss opportunities or, groups that need supported. At SFU, we happen to be, really focused on entrepreneurship. And so VentureLabs is one part of that entrepreneurial ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship at SFU. We happen to actually be an incubator that, even though we have SFU in front of our name, you don't have to come from SFU to be part of the accelerator. So having that link to universities or not having that link to universities is also a difference. And I think one of the reasons I was attracted to the SFU VentureLabs is because it's connected to obviously SFU, and I love SFU. If anyone from SFU is on the phone call, but I love the fact that we can invite anyone from the community across the country into the accelerator.
That's fantastic. Charlie, I'll just kind of come back to you if I can on the same question about how incubators and accelerators differ in their approach, and also just to get, even thinking like, what is the difference between an accelerator and an incubator, how those two are different even. And so Charlie, I'll pass that off to you.
Well, thank you. And I love what Lesley had shared, because, it's similar mindset for me, like how I look at it and how I explain it to, artists per se. The incubator, it's like a little baby, you're incubating this idea, you're nurturing it, as opposed with an accelerator, you have some skin in the game, some experience per se. And so you're able to, take that support and accelerate the idea accordingly, or just fast track and get access to certain resources because you have your idea formulated at the incubation phase. But of course, incubators and accelerators, each of them are different. There are a lot of similarities, but some of them have different offerings, different opportunities, different specializations. And so that will have an influence, in my opinion, in terms of how they contribute to the career development of an entrepreneur, or at the phase of which they are at their career.
Thank you. Wen, I'll come to you.
Sure. So in the formal definition, incubators are those that, Charlie has spoken about, that it takes longer time. You incubate them, you provide services, mentorship as they need. So typically you see the time frame between 2 to 5 years to get them graduate from the incubator. Accelerator programs are shorter term because you want them to, accelerate. And typically, accelerators will take equity in exchange of the services that they provide. But because we are all part of universities, and I believe university-run accelerators do not take equity because we are educational institution. So there's a little bit of the differences, but typically, the private-run accelerator, like Y Combinator, they take equity from the companies that they help.
Thank you for that clarification. Tomke.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about how specifically how incubators and accelerators differ in their approaches to be more inclusive and support entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds. So what I've seen in my research is that there are generally two approaches. One is to create specific programming for entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups. So that could be things that you also mentioned, like a women-specific accelerator or an incubator specifically for Indigenous entrepreneurs, et cetera, et cetera. And an advantage of this approach is for the incubator and accelerator to that it increases the diversity among the client base fairly quickly. And gives access to entrepreneurs who have barriers to access the ecosystem in a very efficient way. A disadvantage that I've seen is that oftentimes these specific programs kind of need to up their game a little bit in taking in putting an intersectional lens on these on the programming, so that, for example, to specifically look at the barriers and the needs of, for example, immigrant women or BIPOC women in a women-specific accelerator, etc., in order to really make sure that it is a place where they feel like they belong and where they feel like they are served based on their specific needs. And then the second approach is an approach that weaves the question of equity, diversity, and inclusion into the overall programming and operations. So that not necessarily creating specific programming for specific groups, but having general incubators and general accelerator programs that kind of have portions of the trainings that tackle the question of how do I incorporate equity, diversity, and inclusion principles into my startup right away, right from the start, or what are some of the barriers that everyone will or may experience when pitching to investors, etc. So these organizations often make a huge effort in having a very diverse pool of mentors, so that they can kind of in the one-on-one mentoring cater to the different needs of all the entrepreneurs that come from a very diverse background. And they often also make a huge effort in training the other side, training the investors about their unconscious bias, for example, or the mentors in becoming very inclusive in their mentorship and considering specific barriers that entrepreneurs might have. An advantage of this approach that it really often tackles systemic issues very well, and it kind of brings this question of EDI into the mainstream entrepreneurship for everyone to think about. And I would say, if we want to say there is a disadvantage, then it's usually a little slower in increasing representation of underrepresented groups, and it's a bit harder to convince entrepreneurs who are from backgrounds that are currently underrepresented that it is a safe space to come, that it is an inclusive environment, simply because it's a bit less visible to the public than having a specific programming. So that's in a nutshell what I've seen in my research.
Well, thank you for that. I know we're going to give some tips and some insight into how accelerators and incubators can improve their services to better meet the needs of diverse entrepreneurs, and we'll get to that more deeply in a moment. So I want to flip the switch a little bit to ask, what are the success factors for startups? So putting that entrepreneurial mindset in. So what is the success factor for the startups who are working with incubators and accelerators? And I'd love to just kind of pull those apart too, to talk about the difference of the incubator and the accelerator. I'm going to start with you, Charlie.
Yeah, perfect. So, I mean, I think there are some pretty standard metrics that are used across the board, like revenue growth, for instance, is a common indicator, a success factor. But of course, if you're in the incubation phase, you might be workshopping an idea or testing its suitability for a market. As opposed with an accelerator, that might look different. It might look more, to what degree are you scaling it, right? So that's a differentiator. But of course, revenue, customer growth, or testing for market suitability, getting customer feedback. So you're really crafting something if it's not ready for market, which would be really great for incubation phase in particular. And of course, what I've seen with accelerators is another layer of securing funding so that you can scale and you can grow. So some success factors could be, are you getting connected to investors? Are you attracting interest? Are you generating more funding to that degree? What operational metrics are you incorporating so that you're keeping yourself accountable as a startup in terms of achieving your goals? Right. Mentorship is also really important as well. And I think that that's a huge aspect from diversity and inclusion as well. So from the incubator point of view, you want to ask yourself, the participants that you're accepting into these programs, what are their backgrounds? What is their identity? How are you reaching out to diverse communities, but also thinking about your mentors and other resources or investors? Are they coming from different communities as well, right? Because we know that it's traditionally been dominated by white men. That stereotype has been amplified in pop culture, especially through the tech world. But things are changing. And so incubators and accelerators in the ecosystem have an opportunity to bring different voices in. And so I think those are some metrics. What I will also say as well is, again, it comes back to the industry as well as the focus of a particular incubator and accelerator. I will say that working with the programs that I have in the creative industries, what typically would be applied, investors and product development, this kind of terminology, we would flip it to something like, are you working on a release? What does that look like? How do you prepare your music for So there are different metrics, like followership on Spotify would mean a lot for an artist entrepreneur. And so I think it's okay to acknowledge that you will likely work with different metrics to measure success, depending on the field, the industry, and the focus of the incubator or the accelerator.
Thank you for that, Charlie. Tomke, I'm going to come on over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Just to tie a little bit into what Charlie just said, I think for the startup, it's very important to become clear about what success means to them. I think there is a strong tendency in like generally in the ecosystem to measure success by growth, by revenue, by the number of employees, by how quick you expand into international markets, et cetera, et cetera. But many startups don't even want to grow like crazy, right? So a lot of startups want to have an impact on the community, on the local community they're in, or want to have a sustainable business, want to have a net zero business, et cetera. So I think it's for the startup itself, it's important to become clear about their own measure of success, and then work with the incubators in order to get supported adequately in their own journey, in their specific journey, individual journey.
Yeah, you raised such an interesting point, because there's often that conflict of what startups see as success versus what investors and funders will see as success too, which can be problematic. I don't want to give my two thoughts. I am your moderator today, so I'm going to pass it on over to you, Lesley, to keep this part of the conversation rolling around. What are the success factors for startups working with incubators or accelerators?
So I always have struggled with this one around what are the metrics that you should be measuring. And the reason is because, again, working with science-based ventures is that you're not going to, like, revenue may be 12 years out. And to me, if you have a life cycle of 18 months, your expectations of what those success factors would look like would be very, very different. And going to what Tomke says as well is, what does success look like for you? I mean, I will always ask an entrepreneur, what do you want out of this? You know, do you want to grow a company? Do you want to, grow it, like, and at what point do you want to stop growing it? But I think that, when I look at it, I'm looking for incremental growth. And I don't mean necessarily growth in revenue. I'm talking about growth of the company. And that has to come, I think one of the things that we don't really measure, and I think is really critical, is around leadership, and is around leadership development as well. And so, when I first started in the life sciences sector, the assumption was that you were going to bring in a CEO. But if you actually are developing your team and are creating a board of directors, an effective board of directors, and creating, attracting great advisors, that's a win for me, right? That shows that you're actually moving to going from startup to becoming a real company. And I think sometimes, and this is where the metrics fall into play, is sometimes the right decision is to downsize, because you've changed focus, you've changed the type of people. And sometimes it is the best decision is to license out that piece of technology so you can actually focus on another key piece of technology. So I actually feel like as we move towards machine learning and AI, that we get much better at looking at what that signature of success would be, rather than one metric or one, being able to look at, I look at in health as well. We never talk about productivity, right? So if we work with the Kids Brain Health Network, it may not ever make it from a revenue perspective, but from quality of life and into improving the health, the family, and improving the productivity of that family, it's huge, right?
Mhm.
So I think we can get better at metrics.
Yeah, I so appreciate what you're saying. Wen, I'm going to give you the opportunity to comment on this one as well.
Sure. I like to focus more on the entrepreneurs themselves. So one thing that, I think successful is if they are coachable. Doesn't mean that they have to listen to the advice that the mentors give them, but they have to be open-minded. They have to open to the ideas and evaluate. So if at the end of the day they don't take the advice, they move a different direction, but at least they tried it out. So if entrepreneurs that are not open to suggestions, I find that they are going to be less successful, because they very narrow-minded, and once they hit the failure, they will probably be done with it. And I just want to end like this discussion with saying that I just attended a conference, and this keynote speaker talked about successful entrepreneurs, you tend to solve a problem that they are passionate about, or they themselves face, because they will keep going no matter how many times they fail to find a solution. But if this is not something that they're passionate about, as soon as they hit failure, they will just drop out. So very, very important for entrepreneurs that have the passion for the problem they're trying to solve, because I think they will find a way no matter what.
I love that you talk about the fact of coachability and the importance of coachability in there. And even in there too, there's some inherent conflict too, because some people will feel like I'm not being coached. I'm being told to change my entire vision as well. That a different perspective might actually not be taking my company where I want it to. So it's really important that we think about the investors that we are aligning to as well, that they see what we see in the company. It's a tricky one. I want to also talk about, many of you have said, like, we're changing the face of accelerators and incubators. We're looking at more diversity in our incubators and our accelerators. We're looking at different industries. What trends are shaping the future of incubators and accelerators? What's on the horizon that's creating some of this change? And I'm going to start with you, Lesley, on this one, please.
Oh, this is a really a big topic, but I mean, I'm going to keep it to sound bites, but this is a big topic in that, I think what many of us talked about, that the funding comes often from government. And so as a result of that, government will often set the tone. And so you'll see incubators, business centers changing based on what is now considered the thing. And so certainly we're seeing in the last budget, AI has now come out, AI versus Web3, I'm not sure, but things like that. So you're going to have government setting what are the topics of, so that's going to drive. And so definitely AI, machine learning, climate is going to continue to be in those areas. So there's going to be those things. I think one of my big concerns is that governments are looking for success, and so they're moving more towards growth stage. So they're moving away from wanting to do company creation or doing a lot of things around that and work towards growth. Well, if you don't continue to do company creation and support entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindset, eventually you can pick the winners. But I can tell you, having been with IRAP for 10 years and worked with probably over 200 companies, you can't pick the winners. There's something that's going to happen that's going to make what looks like a winner now, not a winner in 6 months' time. And so I think that movement towards more of a growth stage focus is a trend that's there. I actually like one of the movements that's happening is to say, let's share best practices. And so I'm involved with Lab to Market and Idea to Innovation, which are two national programs, one supporting entrepreneurial mindset and the other one around market validation training. What I love is actually the consolidation and saying, especially now that we live in a hybrid world, rather than one center developing a program, share that program broadly. And so what, from our perspective, is that we were one of the organizations in BC that developed market validation training. Doesn't really benefit our client base. We're happy to give up the curriculum and have someone else deliver it and support however we want. Because what it does is it frees up our time and our money to be able to do other things. And so that national consolidation of certain standard programming and supports, I think, is actually a good thing. And I'm hoping it'll lead to future collaboration as well across the regions. And I think something that Tomke said that I believe in is that kind of having EDI at the core of what you're doing. So it's really recognizing that inclusiveness and accessibility. And I'm actually really heartened by the fact that if you're looking for government support, you can't just say that it matters. You have to demonstrate how you are actually addressing that within your environment to ensure that it is truly inclusive. And so I think that there are a lot of, I'm going to stop there, but I could go on because there's so many different things that are happening in the incubator accelerator. I will say one thing too, is the words incubator accelerator have always been a challenge because in the US they're reversed. So stage in Canada, definitely they are accelerator. And as an example too, just to speak to Wen's, we're in a science-based accelerator. They're there forever. So they're there till they actually get to Series A investment. So, it really just depends. And so I think even around what we mean by those different areas, you're starting to see people say, we're really about developing entrepreneurial mindset. We're about company creation. We're about company growth. And recognizing too, when we say company growth, we're still really early. We're not talking about, really truly, taking a company that's, 50 people and moving them up to 500. We're still under the 50. So it's still really quite small. But I think I really like the national approach and sharing of resources and collaboration that I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, Budget 2024 just came out this week, so we can signal where government is going to continue to invest in these accelerators, which also opens up space for private accelerators and incubators as well, I will say. Wen, do you want to add on to this question of what trends are shaping?
I think Lesley has said it all. But in Ontario, we are also seeing a big support in intellectual property. So they just established the Intellectual Property Ontario to help, bigger companies push out the IP and leverage their IP for businesses. So that's one of the trends that we've seen here.
Thank you, Charlie.
I really appreciated what Wen shared about how at that conference they were talking about how entrepreneurs are pursuing it out of passion. And I think, as a result of the pandemic and how people have in many ways had a wake-up call on how they want to live their lives, we've seen more interest, people taking more risks, what's there to lose. And so I think in terms of trends, we're going to see more demand for these kinds of opportunities as people are pursuing, side hustles, new ventures, whatever that may look like. I think people are willing to test and explore. And as a result, because of the demand, I think we'll see the emergence or scaling, emergence of new or scaling of current opportunities. And I think that we're going to see a lot more diverse entrepreneurs come through these programs as well. Like the work of Women's Entrepreneur Knowledge Hub has been phenomenal. The pitch competition for Black women entrepreneurs as well. We're seeing more support, and it's really exciting. And I think the notion of see it, be it is really important, because as we see more diverse entrepreneurs take that chance, go into the spotlight, and in many cases be successful, I think it inspires another wave of people to also follow that pursuit. And so how does the ecosystem position itself to be ready to cultivate that? I think is really exciting at this point in time. And of course, I think that we're going to see more work done in different industries that we didn't think incubators or accelerators would traditionally be applied to. So I know I'm talking about creative industries, but food and hospitality and fashion. And I think it's really exciting that everybody can now have an opportunity to pursue it with the right support infrastructure and to develop that idea. So I think that the trend would be more demand, more industries, and more entrepreneurship across the board, which is really exciting.
Well, you just inspired me and got me all excited too, but we certainly are seeing that. And I'm just going to give a shout out to Ejibola, Bird Decidulous Women, who has a whole retail accelerator program. And so we are seeing this changing. And I love how you've touched on a changing social environment as well, in terms of what we are demanding for a future world. Tomke, I'll give you the final word on this question, and we'll move on then to the final question.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of good things have been said. Just a small addition. I think in the past, say 5 to 10 years, there has been a lot of effort on bringing in more entrepreneurs that have been underrepresented in the sphere. Like there were a lot of women accelerators and incubators that came up. A lot of programs that support immigrant entrepreneurs, more focus on supporting indigenous entrepreneurs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a trend that goes a little bit into now training the other side, like training investors about the unconscious bias that everyone brings to the table, about how to ask questions the same way, regardless of who's in front of you, so that things don't go one way or the other unintentionally. Training mentors to be inclusive in their approach, really focusing on bringing in mentors from diverse backgrounds to diversify the pool of mentors and bring in all kinds of lived experience that can then really cater to the needs of an increased diverse pool of entrepreneurs and clients, right? So I feel like there's a trend happening that the other side now is being tackled a bit, so that it's not only about making entrepreneurs fit whatever the culture is around entrepreneurship at the moment, but also really changing the culture of entrepreneurship to be more inclusive.
So well said, and that question could probably go on, and each of these questions could go on for hours. I certainly know, but appreciate that perspective. And I guess maybe it's a great segue into our final question, which is how can incubators and accelerators improve their services to better support the needs of diverse entrepreneurs? And I'm going to start with Wen on this one.
Thank you. So I think we have to be very intentional in terms of the service offering, and we have been doing that for quite a while. And even though we have a structure of how the program will run, every time we change it based on the need of the cohort, because you're not going to get the same cohort every time. Sometimes you get more early stage, sometimes you have more diverse cohort that needs more accommodation. So we have to be able to respond to what they need. Some of the things that we need to consider, the time of the service offering. So we are very intentional of asking them what's the best time. Although we do say that this program typically run between such and such time, but we will accommodate based on the cohort needs. And the good thing is we usually have a smaller cohort, so it's easier to accommodate. Things like religious practices, their holidays, and even food. If we have workshops, we have to be very mindful of the food that we serve, depending on the majority of the attendees. And thinking about resources that they can access, right? Do they prefer the online digital copy, or, although we want to be environmentally friendly, but sometimes people do need that physical copy, so we have to be able to make sure that we have that. The most important thing is the backgrounds of mentors. So, some, like, for example, some women tend to prefer mentors to be women because, they speak the same language. So we will find the mentor that we think will be suitable for the cohort. And similarly, the cultural background, right? So it's hard to understand, like for an Asian, someone from Middle East, because we have different cultural perspective. So it's important to have that diverse pool of mentors that they can access. So I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Wen. Charlie, I'll come up to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is data. Like, what data are you collecting? I think that's important to know who are you reaching and who are you not reaching as part of outreach, especially if you're administering an incubator or an accelerator. And I think that, of course, building on what's said, feedback is everything. It's design, that's your core stakeholder. And if you want to build an experience that's going to serve them, their input is going to be really important. And it's also getting input as people are applying for it as well. So you have that idea on how do you not do a cookie cutter experience, but as Wen is saying, it's catered to that cohort. But I think data is one key thing to keep track of. So you also have a longitudinal idea of the impact of the incubator overall in terms of how it's reaching out. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Tomke.
Yeah, I could repeat what Wen and Charlie said. So I agree. It's the key is really working based on data, not based on what we think we know or what we would like it to be, but like what does the data say? And I think on one hand, there is a lot of data from, the Diversity Institute and the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub around, like, generally what are the barriers, like what are some success stories in like running programs, etc. But then at the same time, really, as Wen also said, customizing it to your own needs, right? Like to the own needs of the organization. So that means also looking at, like, in what geographic area are you? Like, how does the population look like there? Like, who is your target audience there? Then the anonymized feedback, I think, is very important. I've also heard of some incubators disrupting a little bit, like, how they approach the programming, and in the first session, like, bringing the cohort in and, like, really asking them what are your needs, so that they can, like, customize it really specifically to the cohort. And then obviously that means being very on top of making it happen for the program then. But that's a way of like customizing it to this specific cohort.
Thank you. Lesley, I'm going to I want to hit the chat. There's a couple of questions in there, and I'm going to pass this one to you. What would you say are the major differences in types of support of higher education-based incubators and accelerators in both universities and colleges versus those that are not linked to a higher ed institute?
Okay, that one is a tough one. I mean, I think that one of the things that you brought up, Shannon, was around the emergence of for-profit incubators and accelerators, and I think that they are definitely different in their approach and what they're doing. When you're linked to a university, I think that's where you see, I think, the support of the whole process, recognizing that the education piece is very important around that entrepreneurial mindset. So I think the diversity in offerings is probably understanding the role of an educational institution to even train entrepreneurs, right? If they have that focus. I think if you have, especially the strength of the university gives the incubator accelerator credibility. It gives them access to experts. It gives them access to facilities as well. I mean, we look at SFU VentureLabs, we don't have, I mean, we have a space and we have stuff to do a little bit of hardware development, but we're linked to the university and we have access to their core facilities, and we can link the entrepreneurs directly to the university. So I think that there's definitely access to capacity, access to infrastructure, and expertise that you don't get necessarily. It's much harder to get, when you're outside of the university. And so, and if you are aligned with one of the priorities of the university, obviously then your ability to get support, whether it be from the university or from external funding, is different as well. I think that there's access to programs as well. I know that there's as an academic institution, a linked facility, we can actually do MyText, where if you are a for-profit incubator, you're not eligible to do MyText funding. So we actually have a number of funding sources that are actually available to us to do, e-co-ops for entrepreneurs and
I'm going to cut you off there because we have 1 minute. I'm so sorry. I just want to be able to close appropriately. We do have some other questions that came up in the chat. We'll make sure that our panelists have access to these questions and we'll try and get those answers out. Most of the questions are around how are we choosing an accelerator or an incubator, and at what stage, whether you've got an MVP or you're at the idea stage. So lots of questions about the wayfinding, I would say, of accelerators and incubators. Encourage you to look at the Women Entrepreneurship, the State of Women's Entrepreneurship report. Also, there's an access to financing report on the WEKH website, which does talk about some of the different accelerators. To our panelists today, to Tomke, Lesley, Charlie, Wen, thank you so much to all of our audience for being with us today, and to the team at the DI. I wish you all a fantastic day. These conversations always end so abruptly, but we're doing it on time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the team at the Diversity Institute, and we'll see you all again at another session. Bye.